There comes a moment that almost no one sees coming. Not the breakup, not the distance, not even the coldness. It's the moment you go quiet, for real. The moment your nervous system finally gets tired of begging for crumbs, tired of decoding mixed signals, tired of calling confusion love. The moment you stop reaching, stop explaining, stop trying to be softer, easier, less emotional, less needy, less human, just to keep someone from pulling away. And that is the moment an avoidant begins to panic. Not always loudly, not always obviously. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like indifference. Sometimes it looks like them posting more, vanishing harder, acting even less affected than before. But underneath that surface, something begins to crack. Because avoidants are used to distance on their terms. They know how to leave before they are left. They know how to mute their own longing before it turns into dependence. They know how to downplay connection when it starts to feel too deep, too fast, too exposing. What they are not prepared for is your detachment. Your real detachment. The version of you that no longer chases clarity. The version of you that no longer sends the extra paragraph. The version of you that stops trying to prove that your love is safe. That version of you terrifies them. And here's the brutal truth. As long as you kept reaching, part of them could keep relaxing into the illusion that you would always be there. That no matter how long they withdrew, no matter how confusing they became, no matter how many times they gave you just enough warmth to keep you attached, and then disappeared into themselves again, you would still be waiting. Your pain was their reassurance. That's the truth people don't want to hear. Every time you broke no contact to clear the air, every time you tried to explain your heart one more time, every time you offered understanding while they offered distance, you were telling their unconscious mind, I'm still here. You still have access. You can still avoid the full consequence of losing me. So when you finally give up, not in anger, not as a performance, but as a deep internal decision, it hits a part of them that words never could. Because now they can't feel you. And for an avoidant, that is when the nervous system starts sounding the alarm. You have to understand, avoidant behavior is not a lack of feeling. It is a defense against feeling too much. People misunderstand this all the time. They think avoidance means they never cared, that the distance was proof of emptiness. But most avoidants are not empty. They are overwhelmed. Their body often experiences intimacy not just as love, but as pressure, need, exposure, risk. The closer they get, the more the amygdala starts scanning for danger. The nervous system interprets emotional intensity as a threat to autonomy. Cortisol rises. Their body looks for escape, not because the connection is fake, but because the connection is real enough to activate fear. And then they do what they've always done. They detach, delay, distract, rationalize. They convince themselves they need space, or that something is off, or that they've lost feelings, when sometimes what they've really lost is regulation. That's why an avoidant can miss you and ignore you at the same time, want you and resist you, think about you all day and still not text. Contradiction is their language when closeness feels dangerous. But once you stop chasing, the chemistry changes. The dopamine they got from knowing you were still emotionally available begins to disappear. The certainty is gone. The safety net is gone. The emotional control they thought they had starts slipping, and in that vacuum, what they buried begins to rise. This is where the 5 stages begin. The first stage is disbelief. At first, they don't think you're really done. They think this is another pause, another boundary you'll soften, another silence you'll break once the ache gets too heavy. They tell themselves you're just hurt. You just need time. You'll come back. You always cared more. You were always the one willing to bridge the gap. So they wait. And while they wait, they keep half watching you. Maybe they check your stories. Maybe they reread old messages. Maybe they notice you haven't posted the sad quotes, haven't left the breadcrumbs, haven't made your pain visible in the old familiar way. This unsettles them, because your silence doesn't feel dramatic. It feels final. And that's new. This is the first crack in their emotional armor. Not because they miss you fully yet, but because they can no longer predict you. And unpredictability is deeply destabilizing to someone who survived by controlling distance. The second stage is agitation. This is when your absence starts becoming physical inside them. Their thoughts get louder. Their concentration gets worse. They start reaching for distractions that don't work the way they usually do. More scrolling, more work, more noise, more random conversations, more anything to avoid the strange pressure building in their chest. Because now, the nervous system is no longer regulating through distance. Distance used to calm them when you were still energetically available, when they knew you were hurt but present, sad but reachable, wounded but still emotionally turned toward them. That kind of distance felt safe. Cruel, maybe, but safe. Your true withdrawal is different. Now distance no longer numbs them. It exposes them. And that is when they begin to feel the panic underneath the posture. They start wondering things they didn't let themselves wonder before. What if this time they really lost you? What if you're not sitting at home trying to understand them anymore? What if someone else will meet the version of you they took for granted? What if your softness belongs to someone who can actually hold it? What if the one person who kept knocking has finally walked away from the door? This is when they may test the connection. A small message, a reaction, a casual check-in that pretends to mean nothing. Not because they're ready to be honest, but because they need to know if the cord is still there. And if you respond with the old hunger, the panic quiets. They exhale. The pattern resets. They know they still have you. They don't have to feel the full loss. But if you don't, if your energy is calm, brief, grounded, or gone entirely, the third stage begins. Intrusion. This is when you start living in their mind without permission. Not the fantasy version of you they used to control by keeping you at arm's length. The real you. The one they can't access anymore. The one whose silence now has weight. The one whose absence starts echoing in random moments they can't prepare for. In the car, in the shower, at midnight, during some stupid song they weren't even listening to. And suddenly, there you are. The memory of your voice when you were trying so hard not to cry. The look on your face the last time they pulled away. The tenderness you kept offering even while your own heart was breaking. Avoidants are often masters of compartmentalization. They put feelings in locked rooms and call it moving on. But your disappearance removes the lid. What was repressed becomes intrusive. Not because they became more emotional overnight, but because the mind can no longer suppress what the body has registered as loss. And loss is strange that way. When they had you, their fear focused on what closeness could cost them. When they lose you, their mind starts replaying what distance already did. This is where many avoidants begin obsessing in secret. They won't always tell anyone. They may look normal from the outside, but inside, they are reliving moments they barely let themselves feel when they happened. They think about what they should have said, what they dismissed too quickly, what your silence means, whether you hate them now, whether you've healed, whether you're falling asleep next to peace instead of longing. And this is where your non-reactivity becomes powerful. Not because silence is a game, not because withholding is some trick, but because calm absence forces truth to speak louder than your words ever could. You are no longer interrupting their avoidance for them. You are no longer soothing the discomfort they created. You are no longer volunteering your heart as a place for them to hide from consequences. You leave them alone with themselves. And that is where panic matures. The fourth stage is pursuit. Now, this doesn't always look romantic. Sometimes it looks clumsy, sometimes indirect, sometimes delayed. But when an avoidant feels the loss deeply enough, the internal wall flips. The same person who once felt suffocated by too much closeness can suddenly feel consumed by not enough. The attachment system they suppressed begins firing harder. Dopamine turns from certainty into craving. The unavailable thing becomes the thing they can't stop tracking. So they reach. Maybe they send something nostalgic. Maybe they ask how you've been. Maybe they show up in places they know you'll notice. Maybe they become warmer than they've been in months. Maybe they say they've been thinking. Maybe they even use words like confused or overwhelmed, because now they can finally feel what they were outrunning. But here is where so many people sabotage themselves. Because when the avoidant finally turns around, the abandoned part of you lights up. The part that begged to be chosen. The part that ached for one sign, one message, one crack in their distance. And suddenly you want to pour everything out. You want to explain how much this hurt. You want to reopen the door as wide as possible. You want relief. Be careful, because pursuit is not always transformation. Sometimes it is just panic talking. Sometimes they do miss you. Sometimes they do care. Sometimes they genuinely feel the loss. But if they have not built the capacity to stay present when closeness returns, they will repeat the cycle the moment they feel you leaning in again. Panic can make people reach, but only healing makes them remain. This is why your power is not in making them chase. Your power is in no longer abandoning yourself when they do. That's the shift. Not how do I make them panic, but who do I become when their panic no longer controls me? Because the fifth stage, the deepest one, is collapse into recognition. This is when the avoidant realizes the loss is not theoretical anymore. You are not on pause. You are not orbiting. You are not waiting in emotional suspension for them to get it together. You have emotionally moved. And that recognition can break something open. For some avoidants, this is where regret truly begins. Not the fleeting kind, the kind that lands in the body, the kind that makes them see, all at once, the cost of their own self-protection. They realize you were not asking for too much. You were asking for presence. They realize your love was not pressure, it was an invitation. They realize the thing that overwhelmed them was not your intensity, but the vulnerability required to receive it. And they may finally understand you when it is too late. That is the tragedy of unhealed avoidance. They often feel the value of what they had most clearly, only after it is no longer available to regulate them. But listen carefully. This part is not about their tragedy. It is about your awakening. Because somewhere in this whole story, you have probably made their distance mean something about your worth. You have probably mistaken their inability to stay open as evidence that you were too emotional, too deep, too honest, too loving, too much. You may have contorted yourself trying to become easier to keep, less triggering, less alive. And all that did was move you further away from yourself. The real healing begins when you stop measuring your value by another person's capacity. An avoidant pulling away does not automatically mean you were wrong. It often means intimacy activated what they never learned to hold. That is not your failure. And yes, when you give up, they may panic. Yes, they may start missing you in ways they never admitted before. Yes, they may replay your absence until it becomes louder than your presence ever was. But that cannot be the center of your story anymore. Because if your healing depends on whether they finally feel it, you are still emotionally chained to the one who could not hold you. Real power is quieter than that. It is the moment you stop needing your pain to be understood in order for it to be valid. It is the moment you stop auditioning for basic care. It is the moment you realize that love should not have to be translated through silence to be recognized. You do not become powerful when they panic. You become powerful when their panic no longer tempts you to betray your own peace. And that is the warning. If they come back before they have changed, they will often return with longing, but not capacity. With emotion, but not endurance. With desire, but not regulation. They will reach for you because losing you hurts, but closeness will still scare them if they haven't done the deeper work. And if you mistake their panic for readiness, the cycle will start again. The hope, the warmth, the opening, then the pullback, then your confusion, then your self-abandonment. Not this time. Let this be the moment you break the pattern at the root. Let silence stop being a punishment and become a revelation. Let detachment stop being something they did to you and become something you chose for your own rescue. Let your non-reactivity become sacred. Not cold, not bitter, sacred. A sign that your nervous system is no longer available for chaos disguised as chemistry. Because maybe the most important thing is not that the avoidant finally realizes what they lost. Maybe the most important thing is that you finally realize what you were giving to someone who did not know how to hold it. Your tenderness, your patience, your loyalty, your depth, your ability to stay, your willingness to understand pain that was hurting you. That was never small. That was never common. That was never disposable. And now it belongs first to you. So if they panic, let them. If they miss you, let them. If they finally feel the silence, let them feel it all the way through. You are no longer responsible for carrying both hearts. You are no longer the bridge between someone's fear and your own starvation. You are no longer here to prove that being lovable means being endlessly patient with emotional absence. You have outgrown that role. Now, when you walk away, you do not leave as the rejected version of yourself. You leave as the returned one. Returned to your body, returned to your standards, returned to your own name, returned to the part of you that knows peace is not boring, clarity is not too much to ask for, and love that costs your self-respect is not love you need to keep chasing. That is what changes everything. Not their text, not their regret, not their sudden awakening. You. The you who no longer confuses longing with destiny. The you who no longer mistakes emotional unavailability for depth. The you who can feel the ache and still refuse the cycle. The you who understands that being chosen late is not the same as being cherished well. And when that version of you rises, something irreversible happens. You stop waiting for closure from people who only understood your value in your absence. You stop shrinking to fit inside someone else's fear. You stop calling survival love. You become the one who leaves the room when your soul is not being met. You become the one who recognizes mixed signals as a warning, not a challenge. You become the one whose silence is not full of longing, but self-respect. And that is the final twist no one tells you. When an avoidant realizes you've given up, yes, they may panic. But by then, if you've truly healed, you won't. Because what once felt like loss now feels like release. And release is where your power begins.